pleasure in 20 minutes or less to try and cover a huge problem with respect to what are the effects of tinnitus in the brain. So I'm going to do a mix of talking about sort of an overview of some of the literature, but also give you some sort of warnings in terms of, as clinicians, how you might want to assess the level of evidence that's out there. But also I'll plug some of my own research and try and convince you that, of course, it's the best research. There is some difficulty with respect to the potentially most powerful model that we can use as scientists, which is to have an animal model, because normally what you are allowed to do in animals, you can't do in humans, although I will talk about an exception. But another problem is just simply reflected by the fact that we don't have access to this. Right? We don't have the animal who's telling us what's going on and what their perception is and what's happening as a result of the treatment or whatever, which is, of course, obviously what we use as the standard hallmark for our research in tinnitus with humans. One of the major paradigms that's used and has had millions of dollars by the NIH to fund research into tinnitus, depending on who you talk to in the field, but I'm one of the people who's a naysayer, I say it's flawed. It's fundamentally flawed. And so we're having articles that are published in big-time journals like Science and Nature using this paradigm, where we don't actually know exactly what it is that the animals are experiencing. So one example where a really powerful paper was published where they gave the animals tinnitus and then they took it away. Okay, for a scientist, it's beautiful. Right? That's the most beautiful thing you could ever do. But they use this paradigm, this gap detection paradigm, which is flawed. So we don't actually really know what it is that they took away from these animals and what they changed. That being said, that doesn't mean that the animal research should be all ignored, because there are other ways to assess tinnitus in animals. It's a lot harder. So scientists are sensibly trying to take the easy way out and to test their animals' behavior really quickly, but it does come with some concerns. And most notably as well, the studies have largely ignored, up until more recently, what are the other factors with respect to whatever hearing loss that they might have given the animal as a result of noise exposure to induce tinnitus, and other concomitant factors like hyperacusis that might exist in these animals. Again, these sorts of issues are now being addressed because other researchers, not just me, are starting to complain. So as a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed researcher fresh out of my PhD, I landed in England to start a postdoc looking at tinnitus, and I had some exposure to it before, and so the first thing I want to set out is where do I tackle this problem? I showed this slide in a public lecture in Nottingham, England in 2009, and I was kind of laying out the problem even as it was at that time, which is, even at that time, we had evidence from the animal literature and other literature that every single station in the auditory pathway has a study that implicates it in tinnitus. So for a scientist, this is a nightmare, right? Because where do I look, right? I have to look everywhere across the entire system. That's a whole lot of trouble. I think up until this time, if you do like a literature search in terms of the number of studies on tinnitus, say there was X thousand, that number has, from then until now, has been repeated again. And notice, I haven't changed the story. The picture hasn't changed. So this is a bit demoralizing. And yet, we still like to study tinnitus. But what can we say? It's not to say that we don't know anything. And so what are the sort of findings that we have in the brain? Down here on the right, in different colored text, which corresponds to different colored arrows. These are different sort of major theories that have been offered up as to explain tinnitus. I'm not going to go through these, other than to say that they involve a few areas of the brain, but most importantly is that almost all of these models are mutually exclusive, right? So they can't all be right. So this is another real problem, right? As a clinician, say, if you were trying to see a patient and say, well, this is what we kind of know what the state of the knowledge is with respect to tinnitus, well, you can pick whatever your pet theory is and go with that. But I mean, how do we then say, well, this is the best case for our evidence? What can we do? Another thing that we need to keep in mind when you assess new research that might come out with respect to the latest and greatest brain story for tinnitus is that, as I actually directly asked the last speaker, how do we go about separating these factors with respect to what it is that the person it feels in reaction to the tinnitus as opposed to things that are causing the tinnitus? And so for the neuroimaging literature, it's really hard for us to just dissociate these things. And as it was pointed out to me very clearly last year, which is I need to say to you as well, this doesn't necessarily preclude the fact that the person's reaction to the tinnitus or distress itself might be a cause for their tinnitus. Right? So we need to keep that in mind. So these things are all rather unfortunately circular. And a real problem in much of the existing human literature is that a lot of it itself is also suffering from poor controls, which then again makes it difficult to interpret the findings. And so notably these are things with respect to matching for relative factors, which can be a large number of. So I don't want to lambast all the research that's been done previously. The reason why it's so hard is because new factors we become aware of new factors that we need to control for, right? So not just hearing, maybe sex, maybe distress, and a whole bunch of other things. So we're moving forward, but things to keep in mind. So what are some of the methods that we might want to use to understand what's happening in the brain, though, in tinnitus? And so these techniques include recordings of neural activity with EEG or MEG, or looking at brain structure and function, respectively with MRI or functional MRI, or other methods such as positron emission tomography have been used in the past, or a few rare studies that I'll talk to you about in a second. They include electrophotography, which is direct recordings from the human brain. So what are some of the methods that we have used commonly in terms of looking at neuroimaging methods to assess tinnitus? Some of these include resting state measures, so what's happening in the brain at rest, or just at idling time in people with tinnitus. This seems like an intuitively nice way to assess what's happening. Or maybe we can get an idea of what's different with respect to tinnitus in the way that how does the person with tinnitus respond differently if they do to sounds that they hear. Maybe this will tell us something about how their auditory system is different. Another very nice paradigm is we actually can manipulate the percept of the person's tinnitus. Can we change it in some way? Or another way is to look at correlates with respect to the structure or size of changes with respect to neurons in the brain. And finally, a more recent approach that's being explored is trying to look at basically the neural super, so the brain neurochemistry, the technique of magnetic resonance spectroscopy. So each of these comes with some sort of caveat. And so one thing that we need to keep in mind is a lot of the studies that are done with respect to resting state measures of brain activity are not adequately controlled. And so I have a paper where we published where we explicitly tried to match as best as we could, and we didn't find it. Why is that? I don't want to say that all resting state measures don't make sense, but nevertheless, it was our point was to try to make it clear to researchers that you really need to account for the factors when comparing your groups. And notably, just logically, it doesn't separate what are the sort of necessary sufficient conditions for tinnitus from other sort of precursor processes or the secondary consequences. So things like your distress. But that's a secondary consequence of your tinnitus, but you're going to get that in amongst your resting state brain region, right? So is that your correlative tinnitus? Well, logically, no, but you still measure that. And so the responses to external sound paradigm, that assumes that indeed people with tinnitus process sound differently, or in some way that allows you to tease apart what's different with respect to their brain activity. There are potentially concerns here with respect to other factors like hyperacusis that may color your results. And so within the tinnitus literature, there's a very, very famous part of history with respect to a researcher publishing some results, and then 10 years later publishing the results again, or reinterpreting the results and saying, oh, actually, it was all about hyperacusis. This sort of thing, which is fantastic that the researcher did this, right? Doesn't happen, very rarely happens with respect to scientists, unfortunately. But it's another concern that comes with this type of paradigm. And then the experimental manipulation of tinnitus loudness, changing the percept, might give you a better idea of what are the core mechanisms for generating tinnitus, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you've targeted all the key aspects, or maybe the really key aspects, or the necessary aspects for tinnitus. To date, our assessments of brain structure and volume in terms of changes have been really overly sensitive to the actual mathematical approach that we use to do the counts of the data. And so there's quite a mix of findings just with respect to the fact that different researchers have different software, essentially. And that's not a very comforting piece of information. And as I said earlier, that the MRS data are early days yet, but maybe there are hints of things that make sense in terms of changes in inhibitory neurotransmitter activity, which is GABA. So what I want to just briefly talk about is some of the recordings that I was able to make here at Iowa on the brains of epilepsy patients. And that was mostly to look at this, which is oscillatory power, or activity within the brain, which if you look in the upper left-hand panel, we've got some spiking activity, which is in the bottom. It says MUA there, multi-unit activity, and above it says local field potential. And so with our electrodes that we place in the brain, we're able to record these different types of activity, and we think that they are meaningfully related to each other. And what we get essentially is we can look at the data with respect to the oscillatory, or the bumps, basically, in terms of the frequency and the amplitude of these bumps of the brainwave, or the local field potential. And these oscillate at certain frequencies, and so we can look at the power with respect to how much energy is within these oscillations. And we can localize these sorts of things in the brain. And so I'm just showing a couple of examples of some studies that have done that for different frequency bands. So, as I mentioned, I had the extreme pleasure and luck for a very rare opportunity to have the case to record from someone who had epilepsy, but also had bilateral tinnitus. And this gentleman had come to the neurosurgical service to elect for resection of his epileptogenic focus. And so his was a difficult case in terms of localization of the epilepsy. And so he was chronically implanted with electrodes to help localize the seizure focus. And so basically what that meant was a bunch of electrodes were put in his brain. He was sent back in the hospital room, and we just sat around waiting for him to have seizures. And then they could, once they knew where the seizures were coming from, they could reset that area of the room. That's the logic. So then meanwhile, while he's sitting around waiting to have seizures, the evil scientist, which is me, gets to come in and say, hey, I want to study the brain, and are you willing to help me out with some research? And so I was includes total tinnitus, noise-induced hearing loss from recreational gun use, and sort of classic sloping hearing loss. It was non-bothersome tinnitus as well, so kind of a nice garden variety type of case, maybe. And so what we did was we chose to use this experimental manipulation of the percept of tinnitus, that type of paradigm, which is called residual inhibition, or temporary suppression of the tinnitus. So this is where you play a masking sound, and then after you turn the masking sound off, some people with tinnitus experience a decrease in the loudness of their tinnitus. Sometimes they experience an increase, but in this case, we were able to elicit a decrease in this gentleman's tinnitus, and very serendipitously for us, the exact same sound, sometimes, or maybe around half the time, made his tinnitus a bit quieter, and other times it did nothing. So that was beautiful experimentally for us, because then all we needed to do was just to correlate his behavior with what he said, whether the sound changed his tinnitus or not, to what happened in his mind. And so that's all we did. And so here is a time frequency plot. So the y-axis are different frequency ranges, and the x-axis is time. And so what I'm showing here is on the left-hand side of the panel is basically when the masking sound, the 30-second masker, was on. And on the right-hand side of the panel is the change in power that we measured. And this was at the auditory electrodes that we designated, covered auditory cortex. And so the top panel shows the trials in which he said he experienced a decrease in the loudness of his tinnitus. The middle one is where he said there was no change, and the bottom is the difference with respect to that. And so we got a really nice modulation here. So an increase in power in the sort of high frequency gamma range bands, and a decrease in power in the low frequency range. Okay? So what does that mean? So we explored that a bit further. So here, I don't want to unpack this too much, other than to say a whole lot of brain regions were active with respect to a change in his tinnitus. And so we might have expected, and so we have this nice demonstration here, we might have expected on first principles that the brain region that's responsive to 5 kilohertz is a key brain region for showing modulation with respect to us changing his tinnitus percept. And so those little boxes show the areas that responded, and the only areas of the brain that responded when we played just a 5 kilohertz tone. It was pretty closely matched to his tinnitus. But the rest of the circles show all the electrodes across the brain that show the modulation with respect to his percept. So not just auditory cortical areas, but areas involving memory and attention and perception and distress. So quite a lot of brain regions, and the lines, the lovely lines there, just shows these electrodes that show some communication changes, basically. The pattern of activity that they were communicating between each other had changed with respect to when he changed his tinnitus. So a whole lot is going on, okay? And so then we sort of broke those complicated graphs down into some sort of boxology here. And so what we're highlighting are the different sort of brain regions that were modulated and their relative putative functions. And we broke down these into sort of networks with respect to their common function. And these included areas with respect to memory and auditory perception. And there were key brain regions that sort of acted as a way station to communicate these differences between each other. Again, too much detail to go into here, other than to say that we didn't set out to replicate anything with respect to the non-invasive literature, which we were mildly critical of, but we did. So the results that we showed are remarkably similar to some of the proposals from these largely a large database of fMRI studies with respect to the networks of the brain that are related to activity in tinnitus. So what does that all mean? So what I'm saying here is that there's a lot of the brain that seems to be related to tinnitus perception, and what does that mean in terms of moving forward, both in terms of future research or maybe targeted treatments. And so here's the gruesome picture that I like to show. This is, I took this picture, example of one of these epilepsy patients that gets implanted. And so this is a bit flippant of me, of course, but the proposal here is that the way that you would be able to target all these brain regions is you implanted all of them with electrodes, and you modulated the activity. And that's ridiculous, because we can't do the electrodes in the brain, except under certain circumstances. But for these cases, we can. And what this also sort of ties in, actually interestingly, into the cochlear implant talk, is that I recently had the pleasure of another patient who came into the neurosurgical department. Am I going over time? Sorry. I have to tell you this. So this is essentially this is great for us because this represents an opportunity. So we published those data in a nice journal, and of course scientists hate that. Right? It's a single case study, right? You can't generalize, and I don't like it, right? So we have to replicate. Right? So now we have this opportunity to replicate, and I haven't analyzed all the data yet, but in terms of behavior, I'm excited because it looked very similar behavior. I haven't looked at the brain data yet, but unfortunately with the previous gentleman, I didn't get an opportunity to do the thing that I really wanted to do, which is to stimulate the brain. So to stimulate some of these electrode locations. I did get to do that with this last person. I stimulated on an electrode that was placed within the primary auditory cortex, the hashial gyrus, and I elicited the same effects of residual inhibition by stimulating this electrode. So again, I'm not necessarily going to say that we should go plugging in electrodes in hashial gyrus in these people, but it nevertheless was definitely a very direct positive effect. And this did not interrupt her hearing because I was talking to her throughout the stimulation, and she could hear me just fine. So it was very interesting because it was very selective for her tinnitus, and it knocked it out, unlike when I played these sounds and her tinnitus returns to normal after 30 seconds. I knocked it out for minutes. So that implies that maybe there could be some sort of dose-response relationship with respect to stimulation. It was really exciting, but I have yet more to say. Another interesting caveat is the first patient, sort of follow-up with respect to him. He did have a resection to effectively treat his epilepsy, so it is managed now. But also, very interestingly, the resection that he had was to remove a congenital malformation of his posterior temporal cortex, and that also eliminated the tinnitus on the contralateral ear, which is fascinating, the long term. Again, I'm not going to propose that we go in and cut out the posterior parahippocampal gyrus in people, because that will not do well for your memory and other things. But maybe if we can target that with an electrode or certain treatments, that's very encouraging. And this is just to say we published a paper last year because we think that